Book 75, 2019 was American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. I started reading this book because for some bizarre reason I thought that Psycho was the same as American Psycho, even though now it's, when I think about it, it's ridiculous because it's got a different name. You'd think that that would give me a hint, but it didn't. And I kind of thought that the newer version of Psycho in the shower was Knife in the Shower was the what's it called, Christian Bale version. Like it was just a newer version of the old one. So when I was reading this, I was expecting to read like just the same version but a newer one. And obviously it's a completely different like story. Like no one gets stabbed in the shower, but obviously there's lots of other things that go on. So I was kind of like not expecting what I read. It's brilliantly written. Like I've got no qualms with how it's written, but it's just really kind of I mean, what was I gonna say? It's horrific. Like literally, it's like the things that get done in the book to the other people by the main character Chris Bateman is just absolutely horrific. Like I felt physically sick reading it, and it horrified me, and I just kind of thought, I can't believe that there are people in the world that do this, because you know, I get that it's a fiction and it's been written like that, but it is based on kind of like what murderers do to people, and just like, oh, it's just making me feel sick. I'm thinking of it, he like bites like their lips off and bites their tongue off, and it's just making me feel this like, it's just horrible, like, and just what he does to them, and it's just, it's just horrible. And I kind of read this because I thought it'd be really, really interesting to get like a different insight into people's minds, and it was because I always wonder, like, what do people think about? Because I seem to think about things in a lot of detail, so that's obviously filling my mind up, but like, what's filling other people's minds? And I think, you know, some people fill it with like celebrity stuff and fashion, and some people fill it with music, and you know, everyone's got like stuff that they fill their mind with that they're interested in. But this guy in here, he's not called Chris, is he? He's called Pat. Why did I think he was called Chris? That's weird. Pat Bateman. Patrick Bateman. He literally like has things that he thinks about. So he thinks about fashion. There are kind of long descriptions of what people are wearing, and it's all kind of designer stuff, and it's very snobby, and like you know, he thinks that he can give advice on how people should be dressing, and if they don't dress as well as he's dressing, then you know, that's like another reason for why he's better than them. So there's a kind of sense of grandiosity which is usual for psychopaths. They're also very well dressed, so the fashion element kind of fits. He's obsessed with money. Everything's like how much it costs, and he's always talking about like restaurants and getting into restaurants, and almost kind of like using his reputation to get in restaurants. But actually, this is where the writing's good, because his sense of grandiosity is illuminated by the fact that people in the restaurant don't think he has a good reputation and don't kind of like give him tables and things. Like he has to ring up for them like everybody else does, whereas his brother can just get a table quite easily. And so it's quite clear that his opinion of himself is not the same opinion that everybody else has of him. But he comes from a very affluent background, and he isn't working for a living. He's just like, you know, he's in a job that's been made for him, and he probably doesn't do much all day. Like the way that it's described is he isn't actually doing much all day. He's also interested in music. There's a lot of description about music. It's interesting actually that I was saying before about what people fill their minds with, and I've actually just recounted a lot of things that he fills his mind with. It's funny because like it reminds me of Tolkien, you know, when there's like a huge section of prose that's all about something specific. This is what this one does, and it gets quite boring. Like in the end I end up skimming those sections because I was just like, I'm not going to find anything interesting in this section. It's literally just going to be talking about some clothes or some, you know, some music or whatever. He's always talking about working out and about like being manicured and like looking really good. Again, quite, you know, reminiscent of psychopaths. They like to be well dressed and look good and stuff. He's very obsessive with it as well. Though he is obsessed with drugs and sex, and that's kind of like, he's very misogynistic. He's very kind of he treats other people in an instrumental way. He's very predatory. Again, classic symptoms of psychopathy. So it's kind of usual for him to be like that. and he always thinks about causing harm to others. Now, this is where it kind of made me question things, because just because you're a psychopath doesn't mean that you want to cause harm to people. Of course, there are some psychopaths that do want to cause harm to people. Those are the ones that usually get put in prison that we all find out about. But there's many psychopaths who behave like this guy, who aren't wanting to cause harm to other people in like a physical way. So I kind of like lost me a little bit. It was like an almost media representation, a typicality of a psychopath from what's in the media, rather than the actual diagnosis of the traits of a psychopath. And additional to that, there's a lot of things that Bateman does that isn't a symptom of psychopathy, and shows that he isn't actually a psychopath, because he's very neurotic, he's quite nervous in parts, he actually cries at one point. Like, a psychopath cannot physically, their brain doesn't allow them to express emotion. Like, they don't have activation in their amygdala and in the emotional centres of the brain, although that's questionable given new research of whether there is an emotional centre in the brain, but as it's accepted at the minute, they don't have activation there. They can't physically feel any emotion, so they can't express that. The fact that he expresses that just goes to show that he's more like a sociopath, someone who functions, usually had a traumatic incident and then now has reduced functioning in that area, but still has the potential to do so. But then, having said that, even a psychopath isn't neurotic. Like, they're very rational in how they behave, they're very logical in how they behave, they don't have much emotion. So it just was a little bit like, this isn't a psycho, as it's termed. And also, like, at some parts of it, he's hallucinating, he's having psychosis, which again is a completely different aspect of mental illness. It's not, well, this is even if you believe that this psychopathy is a mental illness. It's probably more of a brain dysfunction, if anything. But he's having psychosis, but then again, isn't that just a brain dysfunction? Isn't it all just a brain dysfunction? So it just doesn't fit. It's like, this guy's got all these things that are happening in his mind. He's clearly not well, but it's kind of, none of it's fitting into like a classic diagnosis of a disorder in the way that it's, clinically assessed or whatever. And then also, the reason I didn't really like it was because it's quite farcical. There's like certain points where he's kind of saying to people that he's going to kill people, and people are just like, oh, so funny, he's joking. It's like, I'm not being funny, but if somebody was saying that quite regularly, like, you'd kind of think, maybe there's something a bit wrong with this guy. And it's really odd as well, like, the secretary seems to be a bit obsessed with him and think that he's really sweet and really kind and whatever, but he's an arsehole to her. And even, someone who's blind to that would still not think that he was sweet, given how much of a horrible person he is to it. So I just found it a little bit farcical, in the sense that it doesn't seem very realistic. Now, I wondered if this was kind of like, another element of him being grandiose and him seeing things differently to how they actually are, because that is a possibility. And again, that might, be reflective of the good writing. But then at the same time, I was like, am I just putting that as a stretch to, like, think that the writer is better than the characterization that he's done in this? I'm trying to think if there was anything else. Yeah, and then, like, there's a lot of eroticism in this book as well. This is why it's quite well written, because the scenes are erotic and they do kind of like, you feel like you're reading porn basically. But it's then it like takes a turn and he starts killing people. So it's like, you just feel sick and you just kind of like, oh my god, this is horrible. And like, could you imagine being in that situation and that happening? And oh my god, it was just awful, like awful descriptions. And actually, as I was reading it, I kind of felt like I was thinking like the character, in a kind of like way where you just view other people as being like idiots and people who are, in your way and stuff. Like, my mind was starting to think like that, and I was like, this is really kind of bad, like, that people are going to be reading this book and they might be affected temporarily by that. Unless I'm just weird and I just take books, like, literally when I read a book, I start to think like the character's in there for a while until like I stop reading the book. So yeah, maybe I shouldn't read Hitler's Mein Kampf. I wouldn't recommend it because I was bored through a lot of it, but I would, and also it's not, it's not a representation of a psychopath, so there's no, I wouldn't kind of read it for any psychological insights. I was speaking to one person about it, and they were like, they didn't think that there were people like this in the world, and I kind of thought, I don't know about that. I think maybe that there probably is some people that are like that. But if you kind of like horror and you like kind of people being cut up and stuff, then you would like this book, I think. But for me personally, I avoid horror and all kinds of stuff like that because it just messes with my head. Like, I don't like it, and it scares me, actually. I just don't like thinking that people do that in the world, because the world is horrible enough without actually thinking of the horrible things that people do. So yeah, like, if you want to be dark and stuff, then this will be great for you. But I'm a bit like, no, I kind of wish that I hadn't read it, to be honest, because I've got images in my mind from it that I wish that I didn't still have.